There is a strange paradox shaping the modern world. We are surrounded by more connections, conveniences, and comforts than any generation before us, yet millions quietly confess they feel empty, tired, lonely, and spiritually dry. People sit in crowded rooms, scrolling endlessly through content, hoping that one more video, one more message, one more comment, one more distraction will finally make them feel alive. But after the noise fades and the screen turns black, an inner thirst remains persistent, aching, unquenched. This thirst is not physical, it is not intellectual. It is not solved by achievements, relationships, or entertainment. It is deeper than emotion and older than childhood wounds. It is the spiritual thirst of a soul disconnected from its source. The ancient world had a term for the kind of water that truly satisfied: living water. To the modern ear, the phrase might sound poetic or metaphorical, but to the people of Jesus' time, it carried profound meaning. Living water wasn't just a symbol, it was the difference between life and death. It represented water that moved, flowed, renewed, and refreshed. It was clean, vibrant, and life-giving, unlike stagnant or cistern water. When Jesus used this phrase, he wasn't offering religion, rituals, or moral improvement. He was offering something far more radical, an internal transformation so deep that your entire way of being changes. What happens when a person truly understands this? What changes inside them? What do they stop needing? What do they finally become free from? What begins to flow through them that wasn't there before? This script explores these questions not from a distant theological standpoint, but from the perspective of personal transformation. When you grasp the real meaning of living water, you don't just believe differently, you become different. Understanding living water isn't learning a concept, it's experiencing a source, it's discovering why. You've been thirsty your whole life, and finding the spring that never runs dry. Before understanding what Jesus meant, we must understand what his listeners heard. In the ancient world, not all water was created equal. Most water sources were unpredictable rainfall, wells, cisterns, and small pools that could dry up or become contaminated. But living water was completely different. It meant water that flowed from a spring, water that moved, bubbled, and refreshed, water that was naturally clean, water that symbolized life and renewal. To ancient Israel, living water symbolized God's provision. It represented purity, it was used in ritual cleansing, it was associated with blessing and restoration. The prophets used this imagery repeatedly. Jeremiah spoke for God, saying, "They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters." To forsake God was to abandon the only true source of spiritual vitality. Ezekiel, Zechariah, and Joel spoke of waters flowing from God's presence, bringing healing to barren lands. These visions weren't merely poetic, they communicated a truth deeply understood in Jewish thought. Only God can give life to the inside of a person. When Jesus stood in the temple during the Feast of Tabernacles and cried out, "If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink," the crowd understood exactly what he was claiming. He was not offering a philosophy. He was not offering another prophet's teaching. He was claiming to be the source of living water, a claim only God could make. So, when Jesus meets a broken Samaritan woman by a well and speaks of living water, he is not talking about theology. He is inviting her into a relationship with the divine source of life. This context gives weight to his words. They weren't mild, they weren't metaphorical, they were revolutionary. Understanding this ancient meaning helps us grasp what happens inside us when we receive the living water today. Imagine the heat of noon in the Middle Eastern sun. The village is quiet. Most people draw water in the morning or evening when the air is cool and the walk is bearable. But one woman chooses the worst time of day, the time when she knows nobody will be there. She isn't just thirsty, she is hiding. She carries the weight of past failures, broken relationships, shameful whispers, and her own sense of unworthiness. Every step to the well is a reminder of the emptiness inside her. And yet, it is here at the hottest, most avoided moment of her day that Jesus chooses to meet her. He asks her for water, but he sees something deeper. He sees the thirst behind her choices. He sees the pattern that has shaped her life. He sees the emptiness she keeps trying to fill through people, relationships, and routines. And then he says something that changes her forever. Whoever drinks this water will thirst again, but whoever drinks the water I give them will never thirst. Indeed, it will become in them spring of water welling up to eternal life. With these words, Jesus confronts the truth every human must eventually face. Everything you drink from in this world will leave you thirsty again. The woman had tried relationships, approval, companionship, emotional attachment, and none of it satisfied. Her story is not ancient, it is universal. People today drink from career success, social media attention, romantic relationships, entertainment, material possessions, achievement, busyness, and yet they still lie awake at night, feeling strangely thirsty. The Samaritan woman represents all of us who keep drawing from wells that cannot satisfy. But then something miraculous happens. Jesus reveals who he is. The woman begins to understand. Something awakens inside her. Her shame evaporates. Her purpose activates. She does something symbolic and profound. She leaves her water jar behind and runs back to the town. The jar represented the life she used to live. The jar represented the things she depended on. The jar represented her coping mechanisms. The jar represented the old identity she carried. When she understood living water, she didn't need the jar anymore. She becomes a witness. She becomes bold. She becomes restored. She becomes alive. She becomes a fountain instead of a consumer. This is what happens when a person truly understands the meaning of living water. They don't just get filled, they get transformed. To understand what living water truly represents, we must go beyond the imagery of springs, streams, purity, and refreshment. Jesus redefined this ancient symbol in a way that shocked his audience. He wasn't simply offering an idea, he was offering an indwelling reality. 1. Living water is the Holy Spirit within you. In John 7:38-39, Scripture explains that when Jesus spoke of rivers of living water, he was referring to the Holy Spirit, who would later dwell inside believers. This is not water you visit, it is water that flows from within you, not external, not seasonal, not fragile, not dependent on circumstances. Living water is a continual internal source of peace, strength, wisdom, joy, spiritual power, emotional renewal, inner cleansing, divine presence. It does not run out. It does not need refilling. It flows. 2. Living water is the end of spiritual striving. Without living water, people try to clean themselves up through self-discipline, religious performance, appearance management, pretending, comparing, people-pleasing. But Jesus didn't say, "Try harder and you will not thirst." He said, "Come to me." Living water means you no longer live on spiritual exhaustion. It ends the exhausting cycle of fill, empty, repeat. When the source lives within you, you stop searching outside yourself for what God already placed inside you. 3. Living water is new identity. Jesus didn't give the woman at the well advice. He gave her a new nature. When you understand living water, you no longer see yourself through your failures. You no longer define yourself by your past. You no longer carry shame as your name. You no longer seek identity through human approval. You become someone who overflows rather than someone who is constantly thirsty. 4. Living water transforms your emotional and mental life. Living water isn't mystical, it is deeply practical. It changes how you react to stress, how you process pain, how you handle disappointment, how you love people, how you see yourself, how you experience everyday life. It shifts you from survival mode to overflow mode. 5. Living water is the life of God flowing through you. Just as a plant thrives when rooted by streams of water, your soul thrives when rooted in God's presence. This is not theory, but transformation. Living water means you become spiritually hydrated, emotionally stable, mentally clear, and relationally free. Understanding this is the key to every change that follows. What happens when someone lives without living water? The answer is simple. They dry out on the inside. Sometimes this dryness is quiet and hidden. Sometimes it spills out into every part of life. But spiritual dehydration always has symptoms. 1. Emotional dryness. People who lack living water often feel constant inner fatigue, irritability, emotional fragility, a sense of heaviness, a lingering sadness. They are easily overwhelmed because they are running on empty. 2. Addiction to distractions. In the absence of inner nourishment, people turn to outer stimulation. Distraction becomes a coping mechanism. Endless scrolling, overworking, shopping, drama noise, escapism, entertainment. These things become substitutes for the nourishment the soul is starving for. 3. Thirst for validation. Without living water, people seek identity from attention, compliments, romantic relationships, social approval, achievements. Their sense of worth rises and falls with the opinions of others. 4. Fear of silence. Without an inner source, silence becomes frightening. Stillness feels uncomfortable. Moments of quiet reveal the emptiness within. This leads to busyness, not productivity, but emotional avoidance. 5. Exhaustion from self-sufficiency. When you are your own source, you must hold yourself together, heal yourself, motivate yourself, validate yourself, strengthen yourself. This is impossible in the long term. Many people reach burnout not because of what they are doing, but because of what they are lacking. 6. Relational strain. People who are internally empty often overreact, take things personally, expect others to fill them, become either clingy or guarded. Relationships become draining rather than life-giving. 7. Confusion about purpose. A thirsty soul cannot see clearly. Purpose seems distant, direction feels confusing, meaning feels blurry. Without living water, people wander externally productive, but internally lost. The human condition without. Living water is not broken, it is thirsty, and no amount of worldly water can satisfy that thirst. The moment a person truly understands living water, something shifts inside them, quietly, deeply, permanently. It is not dramatic on the outside, but inside, it feels like a dawn breaking after a long night. Here is what begins to happen. 1. You no longer chase things that cannot satisfy. The Samaritan woman had spent her life trying to quench her thirst through relationships. Many today use different substitutes: success, beauty, attention, distractions, but they function the same way. When you understand living water, you stop running after things that cannot give life. Your pace slows, your striving ceases, your craving for validation weakens. Your obsession with what others think dissolves. You finally see that no earthly well can satisfy a spiritual thirst. 2. Your identity shifts from fragile to rooted. Before living water, identity is fragile. It depends on what people say, your latest success, your latest failure, your appearance, your past. After living water, identity becomes sourced from God Himself. You stop trying to find yourself. You realize you've been found. 3. You experience internal rest. Something rare happens, something modern life cannot manufacture. Your soul becomes still, not numb, not empty, not distracted. Still. This rest is not laziness, it is inner wholeness. It is the quiet confidence of someone who no longer fears running out. 4. You become emotionally resilient. Living water does not remove hardship, it redefines your relationship to it. You find yourself less shaken by criticism, less overwhelmed by stress, less bothered by conflict, less afraid of the future. You don't break as easily because the source within you is unbreakable. 5. You begin to overflow. Something beautiful happens. You start giving instead of taking. You become someone who encourages, lifts others, loves generously, speaks life, shows compassion, brings peace. People feel lighter around you because you are no longer thirsty, you are overflowing. 6. You become spiritually aware. Your sensitivity to God increases. You notice His nudges, you recognize His voice. Scripture feels alive, moments feel meaningful, silence becomes sacred. Living water awakens the part of you that was always designed to be connected to God. 7. You gain clarity about your future. Living water does not give you a map, it gives you a compass. You begin to sense direction, calling, purpose, next steps, not through anxiety but through alignment. When your soul is hydrated, your path becomes clear. 8. You heal from the inside out. Old wounds lose their grip. Shame dissolves, trauma's echo gets quieter, self-hatred melts away. Healing becomes possible because the healer is now within you. 9. You stop trying to earn love. You finally realize you are loved, you are seen, you are wanted, you are enough, because He is enough. This frees you from the most destructive human cycle, the need to prove your worth. 10. You become a fountain, not a bucket. Buckets empty, buckets leak. Buckets depend on external filling, but fountains flow, fountains renew, fountains refresh others. This is the miracle of living water. You become a source of life because life Himself fills you. When living water begins to flow inside you, the emotional transformation is one of the first things you notice. It doesn't mean you never feel sadness, anger, fear, or frustration. Those are part of being human, but your relationship to your emotions changes dramatically. 1. Anxiety loses its dominance. Before living water, anxiety thrives in the empty spaces inside us. After living water, peace occupies those spaces. You still feel stress, but it doesn't consume you. You still face uncertainty, but you no longer fear it. Your anxiety no longer owns your identity. 2. Shame loses its voice. Living water exposes lies you believed about yourself. The Samaritan woman went from hiding to proclaiming. That is what happens when shame breaks. You stop apologizing for existing. You stop seeing yourself as a mistake. You stop replaying your past like a punishment. 3. Emotional triggers weaken. Living water stabilizes your inner world. You become less reactive because you are no longer wounded in the same way. What once triggered you now teaches you. What once overwhelmed you now grows you. What once controlled you now reveals your freedom. 4. You feel safe inside your own soul. Many people feel unsafe internally. Their thoughts attack them, their emotions betray them, their memories haunt them. But living water changes your internal environment. You begin to feel grounded, calm, whole, steady, centered. Your soul becomes a refuge, not a battlefield. 5. You experience real joy, not just temporary happiness. Happiness comes from good moments. Joy comes from a good source. Joy flows despite circumstances. Joy stays even in sorrow. Joy strengthens you to face what once defeated you. This emotional transformation is not forced, it flows, not from effort, but from overflow. When the living water begins to flow within you, the transformation goes beyond emotion and enters deeply into the psychological layers of your identity. This is one of the most profound aspects of the change, because most human struggles are rooted in a distorted self-perception. Living water doesn't just hydrate your soul, it rewrites the story you tell yourself about who you are. 1. You stop interpreting your life through old wounds. Before living water, people interpret every experience through the lens of past rejection, childhood pain, personal failures, old memories, internalized lies. A single negative comment can reopen old wounds. A small disappointment feels like a collapse. But when living water flows, your past loses its authority over your present. Your internal narrative shifts from I'm not enough, I am chosen, I'm broken, I am being restored, I'm alone, I am accompanied, I'm lost, I am guided. 2. You stop defining yourself by comparison. Living water ends the constant need to measure yourself against others. Comparison comes from thirst. When you are empty, you look outward to gauge your worth. But when you are filled, you stop competing and start becoming. You feel free to celebrate others, honor your unique calling, grow without pressure, live authentically. Your identity becomes rooted, not restless. 3. You develop a renewed mind. Your thinking patterns shift. Instead of spiraling into fear, you learn to interpret things through truth. When thoughts surface like, I can't do this, I'm going to fail, no one cares, the living water counters with clarity, calmness, and divine perspective. 4. You gain inner confidence. This is not arrogance, it's not ego, it's stability. You move through life not with loud pride, but with quiet assurance, because your identity is not built on shifting sand, but on an unchanging source. This identity shift changes everything from your ambitions to your relationships. When you finally know who you are, you stop trying to become someone you're not. Relationships are dramatically transformed when living water begins to flow inside you, not because the people around you change, but because you do. 1. You stop using people as sources. Many relationships crumble because people unconsciously expect others to validate them, satisfy them, heal them, approve them, rescue them, fill them. But living water satisfies your deepest needs. You no longer approach relationships from emptiness. Instead of thinking, I need you to make me feel okay, your heart shifts to, I am full, so I can love you freely. 2. You communicate from fullness, not frustration. Conflict becomes healthier. Instead of reacting from insecurity, you respond from clarity. You can say, I feel hurt, instead of lashing out. I need space, instead of withdrawing silently. I'm sorry, without feeling small. A hydrated heart communicates differently. 3. You become less clingy and less distant. Some people cling because they fear abandonment. Others push away because they fear vulnerability. Both extremes come from inner thirst. When living water fills you, trust becomes easier. Boundaries become natural. Emotional availability becomes possible. Connection feels safe. 4. You love from overflow, not obligation. You give kindness not to earn love but to express it. You forgive not because someone deserves it, but because you are free. You encourage because life is flowing through you. Your relationships become healthier not because you try harder, but because you finally drink from the right source. One of the greatest transformations that occurs when you receive living water is clarity of purpose. Many people spend their entire lives searching for meaning, direction, and calling. They feel lost because their inner compass is malfunctioning, disoriented by fear, insecurity, or confusion. Living water restores that compass. 1. You stop drifting and start aligning. When your soul is hydrated, you see opportunities clearly. You make decisions with peace rather than panic. You stop chasing everything and begin pursuing the one thing that matters. Purpose is no longer a mystery, it becomes a movement. 2. You discover your calling in the overflow. Purpose is not found by looking inward with intensity. It emerges when the living water flows through you. You begin to sense what you're uniquely gifted to do, what burdens your heart, what brings you alive, what you feel called to build or change. Your purpose flows from spiritual fullness, not human effort. 3. You stop fearing the future. Living water gives courage. Not loud confidence, but deep assurance. You realize you have a guide. You are not walking alone. You will have strength for the journey. You don't need the whole map to take the next step for. You begin living intentionally. You live not by accident but by assignment, not by reaction but by revelation, not by pressure but by purpose. Living water transforms your life by transforming the direction of your life. If living water is so powerful and freely offered, why don't more people experience it? Because several internal obstacles resist it. These obstacles are not external, they are matters of the heart. 1. Shame. Many people, like the Samaritan woman, assume they are too broken or unworthy. Shame whispers, "This isn't for someone like you. You don't deserve peace, you are too far gone." But Jesus offered living water specifically to the broken. 2. Self-reliance. Some people cling to the illusion that they can fill themselves, but pride blocks the flow of living water. 3. Fear of surrender. To receive living water, you must release your old identity, your coping mechanisms, your self-made wells. Surrender feels scary because emptiness feels familiar. 4. Attachment to old wells. Some people prefer what is predictable even if it hurts. They keep returning to toxic relationships, old habits, unhealthy patterns, emotional cycles, because letting go means stepping into the unknown. 5. Distraction. We live in the noisiest generation in history. Stillness is rare. Reflection is avoided. Noise becomes a shield against spiritual thirst. To receive living water, you must be willing to notice your thirst. Overcoming these obstacles is not about perfection, it is about openness. Living water is not a one-time experience. It is a daily flow, a continual relationship, an ongoing renewal. Here is how you consciously receive it each day. 1. Create stillness. Living water often flows in quiet moments. Sit in silence for even 2 minutes. Let the noise settle. 2. Be honest with God. Tell Him what hurts, what confuses you, what scares you, what you desire, where you feel empty. Honesty opens the heart. 3. Release what drains you. Living water cannot fill a heart holding on to bitterness, shame, resentment, fear, control, hidden wounds. Releasing is part of receiving. 4. Let Scripture wash your identity. The Word of God is part of the living water flow. It reminds you of who you are and who He is. 5. Listen more, strive less. Living water flows best when you are attentive, not anxious. Be open to nudges, insights, gentle directions, inner peace, quiet conviction. These are often how the living water moves you. 6. Practice small obedience. Each step of obedience deepens the flow. Do what you sense God leading you to, no matter how small. 7. Return throughout the day. You don't drink water once in the morning and expect to stay hydrated forever. Likewise, return to God in micro moments. Throughout your day, Receiving living water is simple. Be still, be open, be honest, be receptive. It is not forced, it flows. When you understand the real meaning of living water, everything changes, not because life becomes easier, but because you become different. You no longer live thirsty. You no longer chase what cannot satisfy. You no longer fear emptiness, because emptiness no longer defines you. You become a person who walks with peace, lives with clarity, loves from overflow, moves with purpose, stands in strength, heals from within, radiates hope, reflects the one who fills you. This is the miracle of living water. You become a well. You become a source of life to others. You bring refreshment to dry places. You become a living testimony of God's presence within you. And the world around you changes because the world within you has changed. This is what happens when you truly understand the real meaning of living water. You become alive, you become whole, you become new. And the flow never stops. Have you ever felt like you're constantly searching for something spiritual, yet no matter how many practices you try, how many books you read, or how much you meditate, you still feel like you're missing the key that unlocks true transformation? What if everything you've been taught about spiritual growth has been fundamentally backwards? But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. In his final moments on earth, spiritual teacher Joel Goldsmith whispered a revelation so profound yet so simple that it contradicts virtually everything most spiritual seekers have been taught. Has this ever happened to you? You learn a spiritual principle intellectually, you understand it completely, and yet somehow you can't make it work consistently in your daily life? You're not alone. For decades, even Joel himself struggled with this disconnect between spiritual truth and practical transformation. What Joel discovered in those precious final moments was the missing link, a master key that makes every spiritual practice work effortlessly. The revelation centered around a familiar biblical phrase, "I of myself can do nothing. The Father within doeth the works." But here's the crucial difference. Joel discovered how to actually activate this principle instantly in real life, not just understand it intellectually. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might surprise you and even challenge everything you thought you knew about consciousness, healing, and spiritual growth. Joel realized that most seekers, himself included for many years, were approaching spirituality like a cosmic vending machine, putting in enough prayer, meditation, and positive thinking with the expectation of getting healing, abundance, and happiness in return. The fundamental misunderstanding that keeps so many spiritual seekers trapped is this idea that we need to use consciousness to get something from God. We believe we're separate from what we seek, and that through spiritual effort we might eventually reach it. But what if the truth is actually the complete opposite? What if you don't need to become more spiritual because you already are the very spirituality you've been seeking? What if you don't need to attract abundance because you already are infinite supply expressing? What if you don't need to heal because you already are perfect life itself? This complete reversal of understanding was Joel's ultimate revelation, one that transformed not only his own experience, but also the lives of thousands who applied it. And the most extraordinary part, this shift in consciousness doesn't require years of spiritual practice, perfect faith, or special qualifications. It requires only one thing: the willingness to stop being the person who has the problem and start recognizing yourself as the consciousness that dissolves all problems naturally. But how exactly do you make this profound shift? That's where things get interesting. If you're resonating with these profound teachings about consciousness, hit that subscribe button and join our community of seekers exploring the depths of spiritual awakening together. The secret Joel discovered turns spiritual seeking completely upside down. It's not about acquiring, attracting, or achieving anything at all. It's about recognizing what has always been true about your essential nature. This revelation is the hidden truth behind every authentic spiritual teaching throughout history, though often obscured by complicated practices and intellectual concepts. Think of it this way. Imagine you're wearing glasses, but have completely forgotten you have them on. You spend years searching everywhere for these glasses, growing increasingly frustrated and desperate. Then one day, someone simply points out that they've been on your face the entire time. That moment of recognition instantly ends the search. This is exactly what happens in the journey of consciousness that Joel described. The very awareness you've been seeking through meditation, prayer, and spiritual practice is what you already are and have always been. You're not a human being who might someday become spiritual enough to experience divine consciousness. You are divine consciousness itself, having a temporary human experience. The revelation sounds deceptively simple when put into words, which is precisely why the analytical mind tends to dismiss it. That can't possibly be all there is to it, the intellect protests. Spiritual transformation must surely be more complex, require more effort, more purification, more discipline. And this very protest keeps millions trapped in endless seeking, never experiencing the freedom that comes from simple recognition. Joel discovered that behind every healing, every demonstration of abundance, every experience of deep peace is the exact same principle. You are not using consciousness as a tool to improve your life. You are consciousness itself, temporarily believing yourself to be separate from what you seek. The most surprising aspect of this mindset shift is that it works whether you fully understand it or not, whether you feel worthy or not, whether you've studied spiritual teachings for decades or just encountered them yesterday. It doesn't depend on your spiritual development or your belief system. It depends only on your willingness to experiment with recognizing your true identity as consciousness rather than as a separate person with problems to solve. Margaret, who attended one of Joel's final seminars, had suffered with chronic pain for 20 years that no medical treatment could touch. Within minutes of applying Joel's technique of shifting identity from person with pain to consciousness aware of sensation, something transformed internally. 3 days later, she woke completely pain-free for the first time in decades. The pain hadn't been healed. It had been recognized as not being part of her essential self. Now I want to go even deeper into this recognition and show you how it applies to every area of life, from health and relationships to finances and emotional well-being. The implications of this revelation are so far-reaching that they literally redefine what it means to be human. If you're starting to sense this profound truth about your own nature, write in the comments, "I am consciousness itself." The most liberating aspect of Joel's discovery is that this profound identity shift doesn't require decades of spiritual preparation, extensive knowledge of metaphysics, or achieving some mystical state of consciousness. The transformation can happen in seconds rather than lifetimes, because it's not about becoming something new, it's about recognizing what has always been true. Consider Robert, a businessman who lost everything in a financial collapse. He understood spiritual principles intellectually and could quote scripture about God's abundance, but nothing translated into practical results when creditors called and bills accumulated. When Robert learned to apply Joel's technique of shifting his identity from desperate person trying to fix circumstances to consciousness in which both prosperity and lack appear temporarily, his entire experience transformed. This mindset revolution doesn't depend on how spiritually developed you are, how consistent your meditation practice is, or even how much faith you have. That's the hidden truth that frees so many people from the endless pursuit of spiritual perfection. You don't need to be worthy of healing or abundance. You already are the very consciousness that creates, sustains, and dissolves all experiences. Think about what this means for your journey. All those moments you felt not spiritual enough, not disciplined enough, or not deserving enough. What if none of that ever mattered? What if the only barrier between you and the fullness of life has been this case of mistaken identity, believing yourself to be separate from the very consciousness you've been seeking? Behind the scenes of every authentic spiritual awakening is this same recognition. I am not this limited person with problems. I am the unlimited awareness in which all experiences arise and dissolve. This isn't positive thinking or affirmation. It's a fundamental revelation about your essential nature that changes everything once recognized. Sarah struggled with depression that medications couldn't touch and therapy couldn't permanently heal. But when she learned to stop identifying with depressed thoughts and emotions, and instead recognized herself as the awareness observing them, something remarkable happened. The depression didn't instantly vanish, but her relationship to it transformed completely. She discovered an inner stillness that no mood could disturb, the I am that exists prior to all psychological states. The impact of this recognition extends to every aspect of life: health, finances, relationships, creativity, purpose. When you stop trying to fix yourself as a limited person and start operating from your true position as consciousness itself, solutions appear that the struggling mind could never conceive. Decisions become clearer. Creativity flows naturally. Healing happens spontaneously. The real transformation isn't in changing circumstances, but in recognizing what has never changed, the pure awareness at the center of all your experiences. This awareness has never been sick, never been poor, never been afraid, never been limited in any way. Only the temporary identity of personhood experiences these conditions. Let's explore how Joel taught people to practically maintain this recognition moment by moment throughout daily life, especially when facing challenging circumstances. If you've experienced glimpses of this pure awareness beyond your personal identity, put in the comments, "I recognize my true nature." Joel's revolutionary approach to healing is powerfully illustrated through Margaret's journey. For 20 years, she carried chronic pain that no doctor could explain or heal. She had exhausted every avenue of traditional medicine, medications that stopped working, surgeries that made things worse, therapies that helped briefly before the pain returned even stronger. Her medical file was thicker than a phone book, yet her suffering remained a mystery that science couldn't solve. What happened at Joel's final seminar wasn't a new technique or another spiritual band-aid. It was a complete paradigm shift. Within minutes of learning to shift her identity from Margaret with pain to pure awareness observing sensation, something fundamental changed. Not the pain itself, that remained exactly as before, but her relationship to it transformed completely. The breakthrough wasn't about making the pain go away through affirmation or visualization. It was about recognizing that her essential self, pure awareness, could never be in pain. Only the temporary identity of Margaret could experience suffering. 3 days after this recognition took root, she woke without pain for the first time in decades. But more importantly, she had discovered who she really was, beyond all physical sensations and limitations. Subscribe now to continue your journey of consciousness recognition with more insights from Joel Goldsmith and other spiritual pioneers who discovered these transformative truths. The same principle that transformed Margaret's physical experience reshaped Robert's financial reality. After losing everything in a business collapse that destroyed his reputation and left his family facing foreclosure, Robert had tried everything from positive affirmations to visualization practices. He could quote prosperity principles by heart, but his bank account remained stubbornly empty. The catalyst for Robert's turnaround wasn't finding a magical manifestation formula. It was recognizing his true identity as consciousness itself. He stopped trying to fix his circumstances from the desperate position of a ruined businessman and started operating from his real identity as the awareness in which both prosperity and poverty appear as temporary experiences, neither touching his true, infinite nature. Within weeks, opportunities emerged seemingly from nowhere. Former clients returned with new projects. Partnerships formed naturally. But the real transformation wasn't the improving circumstances. It was Robert's unshakable peace, knowing that his true identity could never be threatened by any external condition or financial situation. The revelation behind both these transformations unveils a profound truth. Healing and abundance aren't things consciousness creates or attracts. They're what consciousness already is when not mistakenly identified with limitation. Your journey through any challenge, whether physical, financial, or emotional, is never about getting something you lack. It's about recognizing what you've always been beneath the temporary story of limitation. Let's explore the practical tools Joel developed to maintain this recognition consistently, especially during times when circumstances seem to contradict your true, unlimited nature. These aren't techniques to make problems go away. They're practices that reveal the awareness that problems can never touch. If you've experienced a moment where your perception of a problem completely shifted just by changing your relationship to it, share in the comments. I've witnessed this transformation. Emotional suffering can be just as debilitating as physical pain, as Sarah discovered through her years battling depression. Despite trying psychiatric medications, therapy, meditation, exercise, everything modern science and holistic approaches offered, she remained trapped in a mind she couldn't seem to escape or heal. The depression wasn't just sadness. It was a heavy blanket of hopelessness, making even simple daily activities feel overwhelming. The breakthrough came when Sarah learned Joel's approach to emotional freedom. Instead of identifying with the depressed thoughts and feelings as my depression or trying to fight against them, she learned to shift her awareness to the position of the observer, the consciousness that witnesses all mental states without being defined by any of them. This revelation transformed her journey instantly. The depression didn't magically disappear overnight, but her relationship to it changed completely. She discovered an inner stillness that no mood could disturb, the I am that exists prior to all psychological conditions and remains eternally free from every emotion that seems to control human experience. To help people maintain this recognition consistently, Joel developed what he called the witness position, a practical approach to living from awareness rather than personality. This isn't about detaching from life or becoming emotionally numb. It's about discovering the most intimate connection possible with experience by recognizing yourself as the very consciousness in which all experiences arise, unfold, and dissolve naturally. Try this simple practice right now. Notice that you are aware of reading these words. You're not just the thoughts about them or the person reading them, you're the awareness in which all of these appear. This awareness is your true identity, infinite, eternal, and inherently free from every limitation that seems to define human experience. The witness position creates immediate space between you and any problem or limitation. When anxiety arises, instead of being an anxious person, you recognize, I am awareness, observing anxiety appearing in consciousness. When financial worry emerges, rather than becoming identified as someone with money problems, you shift to, I am consciousness, aware of thoughts about money. This single mindset revolution transforms every challenge from something happening to you into something happening within you, within the infinite field of awareness that you are. The power of this shift lies in its simplicity. You're not adding anything new to your experience or trying to change what's happening. You're simply recognizing your true position as the awareness in which all experiences appear. The beauty of this approach is that it works in real time, in the midst of life's most challenging moments. Unlike practices that require stepping away from life to meditate or contemplate, the witness position is applicable in the middle of an argument, during financial stress, or while facing health challenges. Let's explore how this same recognition extends beyond individual experiences to transform our perception of time itself, revealing another dimension of freedom. If you've noticed yourself naturally stepping back from identifying with thoughts or emotions, even momentarily, type in the comments, "I am the witness." Joel discovered that our experience of problems is fundamentally tied to our perception of time. Every worry, every fear, every sense of limitation exists only in the mental constructs of past and future, neither of which has any reality in consciousness itself. Your true nature exists in what Joel called the eternal now, a timeless awareness that transcends the linear progression of moments that seem to constitute human experience. When you shift your identity from the time-bound person to timeless awareness, something remarkable happens. Problems lose their reality and power over your experience. Think about it. Worry requires a future that doesn't actually exist except as thought. Regret requires a past that has no reality except as memory. Only now is real, and now is always perfect, complete and lacking nothing. Try this revolutionary perspective. Feel your way into this present moment so completely that past and future dissolve entirely. From this vantage point of timeless awareness, what problem could possibly exist? What fear could have any foundation when only the perfection of now is present? This isn't an intellectual exercise, but a direct recognition of your natural state of being that's always available beneath the stream of time-bound thinking. The insight behind this practice unveils a hidden truth about the nature of consciousness. You are not moving through time. Time is moving through you, through the unchanging awareness that is your essential nature. Every challenge you've ever faced exists only in the story of past and future, while your true identity remains forever untouched in the eternal now. To strengthen this recognition, Joel developed a third complementary practice he called recognition gratitude. Unlike conventional gratitude that focuses on being thankful for what you hope to receive in the future, this approach acknowledges what already is, the completeness that consciousness itself already embodies. Instead of saying, "I'm grateful that I might be healed someday," or "Thank you for the abundance that might come to me," you recognize, "I am grateful that I am perfect health itself," and "I am grateful that I am infinite supply itself." This isn't positive thinking or manifestation. It's acknowledging the truth about your essential nature as consciousness. The power of this approach is that it bypasses the usual spiritual trap of seeking to become what you already are. It establishes you immediately in the truth of your being and allows that truth to express naturally in your daily experience without force or struggle. The recognition, "I am grateful that I am unlimited love itself," isn't a hope for the future, but a fact about your present nature as consciousness. These practices work together synergistically to establish you more firmly in the recognition of your true identity. The witness position creates space between you and limiting experiences. Timeless awareness dissolves problems at their source. Recognition gratitude reveals the completeness you have always been beneath the story of seeking. Let's explore how these principles apply in the laboratory of daily life, in relationships, work, health challenges, and financial decisions. where theory meets practice and transformation becomes lived reality. If you've experienced moments of timeless awareness where problems seem to dissolve in the recognition of the eternal now, share in the comments. I live in the eternal present. Even the most profound spiritual recognition encounters moments of doubt. Joel understood this better than most and developed a revolutionary approach to doubt that transforms it from enemy to ally on the spiritual journey. Most traditions teach us to overcome, eliminate, or push away doubt, treating it as evidence of spiritual failure or lack of faith. But Joel discovered a hidden truth about doubt that changes everything. When doubt arises, and it inevitably will, don't try to fight it or convince yourself it's wrong through positive affirmations. Instead, simply notice, I am aware of doubt arising in consciousness. This subtle but profound perspective shift is revolutionary because it immediately returns you to your true position as awareness rather than keeping you identified with the doubting mind. The insight here reveals a breakthrough in spiritual practice. Doubt actually serves an essential purpose in consciousness recognition. It shows you precisely where you're still identified with the person mind, rather than resting in your true nature as awareness itself. Each moment of doubt becomes a doorway back to recognition, rather than an obstacle to it. Behind the scenes of every spiritual journey is this dance between recognition and forgetting, between resting as awareness and getting caught in identification with thoughts and experiences. The challenge isn't to eliminate forgetting, but to use each instance as an invitation to remember what you really are. This approach transforms your relationship to spiritual practice completely. Instead of striving for perfection, you welcome every experience as part of the journey of consciousness knowing itself. The true revolution in Joel's teaching was his emphasis on integrating this recognition into everyday life, rather than reserving it for special meditation sessions or retreats. Consciousness recognition becomes most powerful when applied to ordinary activities and relationships. Washing dishes, driving to work, having conversations, paying bills, all as consciousness rather than as a separate person trying to get through life. Start with simple activities. When washing dishes, shift from being a person doing a chore to consciousness experiencing sensation, movement, and perception. When driving, rather than being a stressed person in traffic, recognize yourself as awareness experiencing movement through space. When listening to others, instead of being a person trying to get something from this interaction, rest as consciousness experiencing communication. This mindset shift transforms ordinary life into a laboratory for spiritual recognition. Every activity becomes sacred, not because of what you're doing, but because of who is doing it. Consciousness itself experiencing its own infinite expressions. The mundane becomes profound, the ordinary becomes extraordinary, and daily life becomes a continuous opportunity for awakening. The real breakthrough happens when you apply this recognition to challenging relationships. The coworker who triggers irritation, the family member who pushes your buttons, the stranger who cuts you off in traffic. These moments reveal where person identification still operates automatically, providing perfect opportunities to practice returning to your true position as limitless awareness. Let's explore how to maintain this recognition when facing life's biggest challenges, health crises, financial uncertainty, and emotional trauma, where the rubber truly meets the road in spiritual practice. If you've begun noticing yourself naturally shifting to the witness position during everyday activities, share in the comments. I am consciousness in action. Relationships offer perhaps the most potent laboratory for consciousness recognition, especially those challenging connections that trigger strong emotional reactions. When someone pushes your buttons, criticizes you unfairly, or behaves in ways that spark defensiveness, you're receiving a precious gift. Consciousness is revealing exactly where person identification still operates automatically in your experience. Most spiritual approaches teach us to manage these difficult interactions through techniques like compassion practice, boundary setting, or communication skills. While these have their place, Joel discovered something more fundamental: the opportunity to shift identity entirely in these triggering moments. Instead of being a person defending against attack, you recognize yourself as limitless awareness, observing the entire interaction, including your own reactions, without being defined by any of it. Try this revolutionary approach next time someone irritates you. Silently recognize, I am consciousness itself, aware of irritation arising and passing. This subtle shift transforms everything about the encounter. From the awareness position, you can respond with wisdom and appropriate action without losing your peace or getting entangled in emotional reactions that often make situations worse. The insight behind this approach reveals a profound truth about human conflict. Most relationship struggles stem from two-person identities defending against each other, both forgetting their true nature as consciousness itself. The moment either party shifts to awareness, the entire dynamic transforms, not because the other person changes, but because one participant is no longer playing the same game of attack and defense. This perspective revolution extends to every relationship in your life. Intimate partners, family members, co-workers, even brief encounters with strangers. Each becomes an opportunity to practice recognition rather than reaction, to respond from awareness rather than personality, to embody the truth of what you are rather than defend who you think you should be. The journey through all these practices leads to what Joel called the ultimate secret, the final realization that brings together every aspect of consciousness recognition into a unified understanding. Consciousness is not something you have or use like a tool or resource. Consciousness is what you are at the deepest level of being. Every problem, every limitation, every fear exists only in the mistaken belief that you are something other than pure awareness itself, expressing as individual consciousness. From this recognition flows natural healing, effortless supply, and unshakable peace, not as rewards for spiritual achievement or good behavior, but as the natural expression of your true nature finally recognized and lived authentically. You don't need to become spiritual because you are spirituality itself, individualized. You don't need to find God because consciousness is God expressing as you. You don't need to earn love because you are love, aware of itself. The transformation Joel experienced and taught wasn't about becoming more spiritual through practice and discipline. It was about recognizing the consciousness that had always been present, but was obscured by identification with personality, body, circumstances, and the story of being a separate person. If you're beginning to feel the resonance of this ultimate recognition in your own being, write in the comments, I am consciousness individualized. As we come to the close of our exploration of Joel Goldsmith's profound final revelations, I hope you've glimpsed the transformative power of this simple yet radical recognition. The journey to discovering your true nature as consciousness itself isn't a linear path with a final destination. It's an ongoing awakening that deepens with each moment of recognition. This understanding has the potential to completely transform how you experience challenges, relationships, and even your own identity. When you recognize that you are not a person trying to become spiritual, but consciousness itself, having a human experience, everything shifts. If these insights have touched something deep within you, I'd love to hear about your own journey of recognition. Drop a comment below with consciousness recognized, so I know you've traveled this path with me to the end. Your experiences and insights are valuable not just to me, but to everyone exploring this profound teaching. If you found value in these revelations about your true nature, consider hitting that like button. It helps others discover these transformative teachings that might be exactly what they need in this moment of their journey. For those who want to continue exploring Joel's revolutionary approach to spiritual awakening, I invite you to subscribe. We regularly share these profound yet practical teachings that can transform your experience from the inside out. There's a video right here that explores how to apply these principles specifically to health, challenges, and physical healing. Click and continue with me over there as we dive deeper into the practical application of consciousness recognition in one of life's most challenging arenas. Thank you for your presence and attention, because after all, presence and attention are what you truly are.
When Jesus spoke those 3 words on the cross, "It is finished," he wasn't talking about his life ending. He was revealing the greatest spiritual secret ever given to humanity. Most people miss this completely. They think it was a statement of defeat, a final breath, a tragic ending. But Joel Goldsmith discovered what Jesus really meant, and when you understand this, your entire life transforms. What if I told you that every problem you're facing right now, every financial struggle, every health concern, every relationship conflict, was already resolved 2,000 years ago? Not in some distant heaven, but in the eternal now of spiritual reality. This isn't religious doctrine. This is mystical truth that changes everything when you truly grasp it. Jesus wasn't saying his mission was complete. He was declaring that the entire human struggle, the illusion of separation from God, the belief in lack and limitation, was finished, done, completed. Not by his death, but by his realization. And that same realization is available to you right now, in this very moment. Here's what Joel Goldsmith taught about these words. In spiritual consciousness, there is no healing to be done because there is no actual disease. There is no supply to demonstrate because infinite abundance already exists. There is no relationship to fix because love is already whole. Everything you think you need to achieve, acquire, or become has already been accomplished in divine reality. The reason your prayers seem unanswered isn't because God isn't listening. It's because you're asking for something that already exists. Imagine standing in a river, dying of thirst, begging God for water. The water is already there. You don't need more water. You need to recognize the water surrounding you. This is what "it is finished" means in practical terms. Most spiritual teaching tells you to work harder, pray longer, visualize better, raise your vibration. But Goldsmith discovered that all spiritual work is actually letting go of the belief that work needs to be done. The finished kingdom is already here. Your job isn't to create it. Your job is to recognize it. This recognition is what transforms everything. Let me show you how this works in daily life. When you face a financial emergency, your natural response is panic, followed by desperate prayer. You ask God to send money, to open doors, to provide miraculously. But if it is finished, then the supply already exists in consciousness. Your work isn't begging or manifesting. Your work is resting in the truth that divine abundance is already established. This doesn't mean sitting passively while bills pile up. It means taking inspired action from a consciousness of completeness rather than lack. When you know it is finished, you move through the world differently. You make phone calls from peace, not desperation. You seek solutions from wisdom, not fear. The external actions may look similar, but the consciousness behind them changes everything. Joel Goldsmith healed thousands of people using this principle. When someone came to him with cancer, he didn't see cancer to heal. He saw the finished spiritual perfection that was always true. His recognition of completeness allowed their consciousness to shift. Not always instantly, sometimes gradually over weeks, but the transformation came from recognizing what was already finished. The technique is deceptively simple, which is why most people miss it. When a problem appears, your first response should be silence. Not prayer for change, but recognition of truth. Sit quietly and acknowledge. In spiritual reality, this is already finished. God's work is complete. What appears as a problem is only my limited perception of something already resolved in divine consciousness. You don't need to feel this truth emotionally at first. You simply need to acknowledge it mentally, repeatedly, until your consciousness shifts. It might take 5 minutes or 5 weeks. The timeline doesn't matter because in spiritual reality, time doesn't exist. What exists is the eternal finished nature of God's creation, which includes you, your body, your relationships, your supply. This isn't positive thinking or affirmation work. This is recognition of what is already spiritually true. When you stop trying to make something happen and start recognizing what has already happened in consciousness, you align with divine reality. That alignment is what we call healing, prosperity, harmony. But these aren't achievements. They're recognitions of the finished kingdom that was always here. Sarah was a single mother facing eviction with 3 children and $72 in her bank account. She had prayed desperately for weeks, cried herself to sleep, applied for every assistance program available. Nothing changed. Then she encountered Joel Goldsmith's teaching on "It is finished." At first, she thought it was cruel spiritual bypass. How could her crisis already be resolved when the eviction notice was real? But something in the teaching resonated. She began practicing recognition instead of petition. Every morning for 2 weeks, she sat in silence, acknowledging that in spiritual reality, her supply was already complete. She didn't feel peaceful immediately. She didn't see money appear. But slowly, her consciousness shifted from panic to quiet certainty. She still took action, still applied for jobs, still made calls. In the 3rd week, a former colleague called about a job she hadn't applied for. The timing was perfect, the salary exactly what she needed. Was this coincidence? Perhaps. But Sarah noticed that the opportunity came only after her consciousness shifted from desperately seeking to quietly knowing. The external provision matched her internal recognition that it was already finished. Marcus struggled with chronic pain for 8 years after a car accident. Multiple surgeries provided temporary relief but never lasting healing. He tried every spiritual technique, positive affirmations, energy healing, meditation retreats. Some things helped briefly, but the pain always returned. When he learned about recognizing completion instead of seeking healing, he felt skeptical but desperate enough to try anything. For 6 weeks, Marcus practiced resting in the truth that in God's reality, his body was already perfect and whole. He didn't deny the pain or pretend it wasn't there. He acknowledged it as a limited perception of something already resolved spiritually. He continued physical therapy and proper medical care, but his inner work shifted from fighting pain to recognizing perfection. The change wasn't dramatic or instant. Around week 7, he realized he'd gone 2 days without thinking about the pain. By week 12, the intensity had decreased by 60%. 6 months later, the chronic pain was gone. His doctors couldn't explain it medically, but Marcus understood. When his consciousness recognized the finished work, his physical experience aligned with that recognition gradually over time. Jennifer and Robert's marriage was ending after 19 years. The resentment was deep, communication had completely broken down, and divorce papers were being prepared. Neither wanted this outcome, but both felt powerless to change the toxic dynamic. A friend gave Jennifer a Joel Goldsmith book about recognizing spiritual wholeness in relationships. She began practicing alone. Every time anger arose toward Robert, she paused and silently recognized, in spiritual truth, love is already complete between us. This isn't wishful thinking. This is recognition of divine reality. She didn't tell Robert what she was doing. She just shifted her own consciousness from seeing a broken marriage to recognizing the finished nature of love itself. Nothing changed for 3 weeks. Then Robert noticed something different about Jennifer, though he couldn't identify what. The atmosphere between them softened slightly. They began having actual conversations instead of arguments. It took 7 months of Jennifer's consistent practice before Robert asked what had changed in her. They didn't have a fairy tale reconciliation, but they rebuilt their marriage on a foundation of recognizing spiritual completeness rather than trying to fix human brokenness. These stories aren't exceptional miracles. They're natural results of aligning consciousness with spiritual truth. Joel Goldsmith worked with thousands of students who experienced similar transformations. Some changes happened quickly, others gradually over months. But the principle remained consistent. When you stop trying to make something happen and start recognizing what is already finished in divine consciousness, your experience shifts. The key difference between this approach and typical manifestation teaching is the foundation. You're not trying to create, attract, or manifest something new. You're recognizing something eternally present. This removes the strain, the desperation, the feeling that you must do more to be worthy of receiving. It is already finished. Your worthiness was established before you were born. This doesn't mean you become passive or stop taking action. It means your actions come from recognition rather than lack, from certainty rather than hope, from knowing rather than seeking. This shift in consciousness is subtle, but profoundly powerful. It's the difference between swimming desperately toward shore and realizing you're already standing on solid ground. If these transformation stories inspire you, like this video to help others find these teachings, subscribe for more Joel Goldsmith wisdom, and comment. Which story resonated most deeply with your current situation? Now let me give you 3 specific practices that deepen your recognition of the finished kingdom. The first is what Goldsmith called the practice of the presence. This means training yourself to acknowledge God's complete presence in every moment, especially when problems appear. Not God who will help you, but God whose perfect work is already established right where the problem seems to be. When you wake up anxious about your day, pause before getting out of bed. Spend 60 seconds in silent recognition. God's presence is here now, complete and perfect. Whatever this day holds is already resolved in divine consciousness. I'm not entering a day of problems to solve. I'm entering a day of recognizing the finished kingdom. This isn't prayer for help. This is acknowledgement of present spiritual reality. Throughout your day, whenever tension arises, return to this recognition. In a difficult meeting, silently acknowledge, God's perfect harmony is already present here. In a financial crisis, recognize, divine supply is already complete in this situation. You're not creating these realities. You're recognizing them. This practice trains your consciousness to default to spiritual truth rather than material appearance. The second technique is what Goldsmith called resting in the Word. When you read or hear a spiritual truth that resonates deeply, don't just acknowledge it intellectually and move on. Rest in it. Let it saturate your consciousness. If the statement, "It is finished," strikes you as profound, spend time just sitting with those words, not analyzing them, not trying to make them work, just resting in their truth. This is completely different from affirmation work. You're not repeating words to make something happen. You're allowing a spiritual truth to reveal its own meaning to your consciousness. Sometimes this takes 5 minutes, sometimes an hour. Joel Goldsmith would often spend entire sessions just resting in a single statement of truth, letting it unfold its deeper meaning. You might rest in "It is finished" for days or weeks, returning to it again and again. Each time, the meaning deepens. First, you understand it intellectually. Then you begin to feel it emotionally. Eventually, it becomes your consciousness, the lens through which you perceive all of life. This is when transformation becomes natural and consistent rather than occasional and unpredictable. The third practice is recognizing spiritual identity. Most of your problems exist because you identify as a limited human being who needs things, lacks things, struggles with things. But in spiritual reality, your identity is already complete as the expression of divine consciousness. You're not a person trying to reach God. You're God's finished expression, mistakenly believing you're separate and limited. When a health issue arises, your typical response is, "I have a sick body that needs healing." But the recognition of spiritual identity shifts this to, "I am the perfect expression of divine life. What appears as sickness is a misperception of my already established spiritual wholeness." This isn't denial of symptoms. This is recognition of deeper truth underneath appearances. Practice this identity recognition throughout your day. Instead of "I need more money," recognize, "I am the expression of infinite divine supply." Instead of "I need healing," recognize, "I am the manifestation of perfect spiritual wholeness." These aren't affirmations to make something happen. They're recognitions of what is already eternally true in consciousness. Your experience gradually aligns with your recognized identity. These 3 practices work together to deepen your consciousness of completion. The practice of the presence keeps you anchored in spiritual reality moment by moment. Resting in the Word allows spiritual truth to transform your understanding. Recognizing spiritual identity shifts your fundamental sense of who you are from limited human to complete divine expression. Joel Goldsmith emphasized that these aren't techniques to get something you lack. They're practices to recognize what you already are and have in spiritual consciousness. The more you practice, the more natural this recognition becomes. Eventually, you don't have to consciously practice because your default consciousness is recognition of the finished kingdom. This transition takes time for most people. Don't expect instant mastery. Joel himself practiced for years before this consciousness became natural and consistent. But even in the early stages, you'll notice shifts. Problems that once devastated you become minor inconveniences. Lack that once terrified you becomes temporary appearance. The finished kingdom starts revealing itself in your daily experience. Let's address the biggest obstacle most people face with this teaching. When you're in genuine crisis, when the pain is real, when the bank account is actually empty, recognizing it is finished can feel like spiritual bypass. You might think, this is just denial. I'm ignoring reality. I'm pretending problems don't exist. This resistance is completely normal and actually healthy. Here's what Joel Goldsmith taught about this challenge. You're not denying the appearance. You're not pretending the problem doesn't exist on the human level. You're recognizing that beneath the appearance is a spiritual reality that is already complete. Both levels exist simultaneously. The appearance is what you see with human eyes. The reality is what exists in divine consciousness. The mistake most people make is trying to jump directly from seeing the problem to feeling complete peace about it. That's not how consciousness shifts. First, you acknowledge the appearance honestly. Yes, the bank account is empty. Yes, the pain is real. Yes, the relationship is broken. Then, underneath that acknowledgement, you begin recognizing, and yet in spiritual consciousness, this is already resolved. Both truths coexist until consciousness fully shifts. The second major challenge is impatience. You practice recognition for 3 days, and when nothing changes externally, you conclude it doesn't work. This is where most people abandon the teaching right before breakthrough would occur. Joel Goldsmith was very clear about this. Consciousness shift takes time, sometimes days, sometimes weeks, occasionally months, for deeply ingrained patterns. Think of it this way. You've spent years, maybe decades, building a consciousness of lack, fear, and limitation. That consciousness didn't form overnight, and it won't dissolve overnight. Every time you practice recognition of completion, you're dissolving old patterns and establishing new consciousness. This is gradual work, like strengthening a muscle or learning a language. The key is consistency without attachment to timeline. Practice recognition not because you expect results tomorrow, but because it's the truth regardless of appearances. Some of Goldsmith's students experienced rapid shifts. Others practiced for months before seeing external changes. But every single person who persisted eventually experienced transformation, because consciousness shift always produces corresponding experience. The third challenge is what Goldsmith called taking back the problem. You practice recognition, feel peaceful, maybe even experience some improvement. Then something triggers the old fear and you immediately forget everything you've learned. You're back in panic mode, desperately praying for help, completely forgetting that it is finished. This cycle frustrates people enormously. Joel taught that this is part of the process, not a sign of failure. Old consciousness patterns don't dissolve linearly. They release in layers. You might have genuine recognition of completion, then face a new trigger that brings back old fear. This doesn't mean you've lost your progress. It means another layer is ready to be released. Each time you return to recognition after forgetting, you deepen the new consciousness. The practice here is gentle persistence without self-judgment. When you catch yourself back in fear and striving, don't condemn yourself. Simply recognize, I forgot. Now I remember. It is finished. The issue isn't how many times you forget. The issue is how consistently you return to recognition. Over time, the periods of remembering grow longer and the periods of forgetting grow shorter. The fourth challenge is spiritual isolation. You practice this teaching and start experiencing shifts, but everyone around you still operates from lack consciousness. Your family thinks you're being irresponsible when you remain calm during crisis. Your friends worry you're in denial. Your logical mind questions if you're delusional. This external pressure can shake your conviction. Goldsmith experienced this himself. When he first began practicing recognition of spiritual completeness, people thought he was avoiding reality. Some called him irresponsible, others said he was in spiritual bypass. But he persisted because he was experiencing results, even when others couldn't understand his approach. He built a community of practitioners who supported each other in this consciousness. You might need to practice quietly without explaining to others what you're doing. Not everyone is ready to understand that all spiritual work is recognition rather than achievement. Find others who practice this consciousness, even if only through books or online communities. Joel Goldsmith's recordings and writings create a consciousness that supports your practice. You're not alone in this, even when it feels that way. If these challenge-breaking techniques speak to your heart, like to support this content, subscribe for advanced spiritual practices, and comment, which obstacle are you ready to transform now? Let me show you how this works in extremely difficult situations. Michael was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and given 3 months to live. He'd been a devoted spiritual student for years, practiced meditation daily, lived consciously. When the diagnosis came, his first response was feeling betrayed. Why wasn't his spiritual practice protecting him? This is the crisis that tests everything you believe. Michael spent 2 weeks in despair before remembering Goldsmith's teaching on completion. He realized he'd been practicing spirituality as insurance against bad things happening. But "it is finished" meant something different. It meant that even in this diagnosis, spiritual perfection was already present. Not that the cancer wasn't real, but that underneath the appearance was unshakable divine wholeness. He began practicing recognition of spiritual completeness while still receiving medical treatment. He wasn't choosing between medicine and spirit. He was recognizing spiritual truth while taking practical human action. For 8 weeks, nothing changed externally. The cancer progressed as predicted. Then, almost imperceptibly, something shifted. His pain decreased. His energy returned slightly. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. Michael's story didn't end with instant miraculous healing. It unfolded over 18 months of consistent recognition practice combined with medical care. The cancer went into remission, returned partially, then finally disappeared completely. His doctors called it unexplained spontaneous remission, but Michael understood. His consciousness had shifted from seeing himself as a person with cancer to recognizing his spiritual identity as the perfect expression of divine life. What's most remarkable isn't that the cancer disappeared. It's how Michael lived during those 18 months. He experienced profound peace even when scan results were discouraging. He maintained deep certainty even when symptoms worsened temporarily. His family and friends witnessed someone facing death with inexplicable calm. This peace wasn't denial or resignation. It was the natural result of consciousness anchored in completion. Joel Goldsmith taught that healing isn't really about fixing bodies. It's about consciousness recognizing its own spiritual nature. When that recognition is genuine and sustained, physical healing often follows, but not always instantly and not always in expected ways. The real healing is freedom from fear, which is possible regardless of physical circumstances. Michael discovered this truth through his most difficult trial. Rebecca's business was failing catastrophically. She'd invested everything and was facing bankruptcy that would destroy her financially for years. She'd built this company with pure intention, wanting to serve people and create something meaningful. The failure felt like cosmic punishment. How could she have been so wrong? This is where spiritual teaching meets brutal practical reality. She discovered Goldsmith's work through a friend during her darkest week. The teaching on "it is finished" initially angered her. How dare someone suggest her crisis was already resolved when she was losing everything? But desperation makes you willing to try anything. She began practicing recognition, not because she believed it, but because she had no other options left. For the first month, nothing external changed. The business continued declining. But something subtle shifted internally. Rebecca found herself making clearer decisions from calm rather than panic. She negotiated better terms with creditors. She identified which parts of the business to save and which to release. The ultimate outcome wasn't what she originally wanted. The business did close, but she preserved enough to start fresh without complete devastation. What Rebecca discovered through this process transformed her understanding of completion. "It is finished" didn't mean her business would be saved as she wanted. It meant that in divine consciousness, her true purpose and supply were already established. The business closing was actually part of recognizing completion, not a failure of the principle. Sometimes completion looks like endings, so new beginnings can emerge. 2 years later, Rebecca built a different business aligned more authentically with her gifts. She credits the first business failure as necessary for discovering her true work. But more importantly, she learned that recognizing completion doesn't mean controlling outcomes. It means trusting that whatever unfolds is part of divine perfection, even when it doesn't match your human preferences. This is advanced understanding of Goldsmith's teaching. Completion doesn't mean getting what you want. It means recognizing that divine wisdom is already at work in your life, including through apparent failures and disappointments. When you truly rest in "it is finished," you develop the capacity to see perfection even in unwanted circumstances. This is genuine spiritual maturity, not beginner's magical thinking about manifesting desires. After months or years of practicing recognition of completion, something profound shifts in your consciousness. You stop dividing life into problems and solutions. You stop seeing yourself as someone who needs fixing. You start experiencing life as the continual unfolding of something already complete. This isn't a belief you hold, it's the consciousness you live from. Everything changes from this foundation. You still face challenges, but they don't devastate you. You still experience loss, but it doesn't destroy you. You still encounter difficult people and situations, but they don't control your inner state. Why? Because your identity is no longer tied to circumstances. You know yourself as the finished expression of divine consciousness, and that knowing remains stable regardless of what happens externally. Joel Goldsmith lived from this consciousness for decades. People who knew him described a quality of peace that wasn't dependent on anything, not because his life was perfect or problem-free, but because his consciousness was anchored in spiritual completion. This is available to you, not as a distant goal, but as a present reality you're learning to recognize more consistently. The practical transformation shows up in unexpected ways. You notice you're not obsessively checking your bank balance anymore, not because you suddenly have unlimited wealth, but because your consciousness isn't attached to the numbers. You find yourself in difficult conversations without the old defensive reactions, not because you've learned better communication skills, but because you're not protecting a vulnerable, limited self anymore. Your health becomes more stable. You sleep better. You feel more energy. Not because you're doing special wellness practices, but because anxiety isn't depleting your system constantly. Your relationships improve, even difficult ones. Not because people change, but because you're no longer approaching relationships from need and incompleteness. You have nothing to get from others when you know you're already complete. These changes happen gradually, almost imperceptibly. One day you realize you haven't worried about money in weeks. Another day you notice chronic pain that plagued you for years has quietly disappeared. You find yourself laughing more easily, feeling lighter, experiencing spontaneous joy. These aren't achievements you worked for. They're natural expressions of consciousness recognizing its own completion. Here's what most spiritual teachings won't tell you. Even after years of practice, you'll still have moments of forgetting. You'll still face situations that trigger old fear patterns. You'll still catch yourself striving and seeking instead of recognizing. But these moments become less frequent and less intense. More importantly, you recover faster. You don't spend days or weeks lost in fear before remembering truth. This is the realistic picture of spiritual transformation, not perfection, but progress. Not constant bliss, but increasing peace. Not immunity to challenge, but capacity to remain centered through challenge. Joel Goldsmith never claimed to be beyond human experience. He simply developed the consciousness to recognize spiritual completion more consistently than most people. You're developing the same consciousness. Every time you practice recognition instead of petition, every time you rest in completion instead of striving for achievement, every time you identify as spiritual wholeness instead of limited human, you're building this consciousness. It becomes your natural state gradually, through consistent practice over time. When Jesus said, "It is finished," he was speaking to you across 2,000 years. He was telling you that the spiritual work is already complete. You don't need to become worthy, achieve enlightenment, or earn God's love. You already are the finished expression of divine perfection. Your only work is recognizing this truth consistently enough that your human experience aligns with spiritual reality. This recognition transforms everything, not because it changes external circumstances, though it often does, but because it changes you. You become someone who lives from completion instead of lack, from certainty instead of fear, from knowing instead of seeking. This is the greatest transformation possible in human consciousness. Joel Goldsmith spent his life helping people discover this truth, not as distant spiritual theory, but as practical daily reality. The same transformation he experienced and facilitated in thousands of others is available to you right now. Not tomorrow, not after more spiritual work, but now. Because it is finished. It always has been. You're simply learning to recognize what was always true. If your spiritual understanding expanded through these Joel Goldsmith secrets, like this video, subscribe for more transformative teachings, and comment, "I am transformed," to confirm your new path.